It's Ashley from Sweet Dreams Bake Shop, and welcome to Vlogmas Day 2. So I know I promised you guys a lot of cookie tutorials that are upcoming, and they are all ready to go lined up. I just thought I would splice in a few other types of baking things, like my regular baking tips and advice, and I thought I would also give you some baking business advice along the way, just like we usually do on our channel, just everything Christmas and winter related. So let's first start off with looking at my friend's calendar. So yesterday I did get the bracelet from the first box if you missed that. Let's look for box number 2 here. So box number 2 is right up here. And what I love about this friend's calendar are the boxes aren't all over the place. They're pretty much aligned. So let's take a look at what this is. It's super cute. I'm not gonna take it out right now, but I will show you something up close. Comment down below if Chandler is one of your favorite characters, because he's for sure definitely one of mine. And I apologize for my camera angle. I left some of my video equipment at the school because I am doing some things with them. So unfortunately, this is the camera angle that we're working with, and I'm just dealing with it. Now that we've got that done and over with, today I'm going to be talking about all of the baking rules that I break. With all of the Christmas baking that you're doing, you're probably wondering, do I actually have to follow these steps to a T? Is it actually going to make a difference? Now, a little disclaimer, I am by no means a professional pastry chef, just a person that has done a lot of baking. And I personally find no differences when I do these things or when I don't. Now, if you have a very good palate, perhaps you might notice a difference, but I haven't noticed a notable difference enough for me to go through these extra steps. So let's get into it. So the first thing that I never do is I really never bring my ingredients to room temperature. Now there's a few reasons why I don't do this. One, when I decide to make something, I generally have things like butter in the fridge. My eggs as well, I don't really bring them to room temperature. Now, there are certain instances in which I will bring things to room temperature. So, for example, I do always bring my egg whites to room temperature when I'm making something like meringues, for example. Then I will bring them to room temperature. But if it's like a cookie or something of a sort like that, then I very rarely ever bring things to room temperature. And if I do, it is by complete accident. Now you might be saying to me, but Ashley, then your cookies are not going to turn out, or your cake is not going to be as fluffy. And that very may well be true, but I have worked with my recipes over and over again, and I have found what works for me. So for example, with my sugar cookies, I know that there's absolutely no difference if I bring those ingredients to temperature or not. It always seems to work out. So I skip that step and I just go straight into starting my batch of cookies and getting going. And I will say that sugar cookies is probably a good measure of whether or not this is going to work for you or not, because sugar cookies can be very finicky. If you don't have the right ratio, they can spread out when they're baking, but literally every time I do this and I don't bring ingredients up to temperature, it has been completely fine. The next thing I never do is sift ingredients. I think there are a very few select recipes where I will sift the ingredients, for example, for macaron flour or for flour that's going into an angel food cake. But literally all of the other recipes, I never ever sift the ingredients. And what does sifting do? Well, it does add a lightness to your recipes, and it also is supposed to eliminate any lumps, of course. Now, I just don't feel like most of the things that I like to make require me to sift the ingredients. But of course, it has taken a lot of years for me to discover which things really would require me to sift it and which wouldn't. So the reason that I sift it for things like macarons, I don't want lumps in the shells. The reason that I sift it for angel food cake, you want that cake as light and as airy as possible. But for all of the other things, I have never noticed a difference. I never ever measure vanilla. I used to get out my little tablespoon and measure it super, super carefully, but after a while I just discovered, you know what? Why am I doing this? So I like to go 1 glug, 2 glug, done. And the glug is pretty much a tablespoon, but of course that changes with everybody's pour. So really, I've just learned to eyeball my vanilla. It's never thrown a recipe of mine off track, but it's just another one of those things that I never do that I know you're supposed to do. The next thing that I never do is I absolutely never use unsalted butter. If you've noticed in any of my recipes, sometimes I show you the butter block when I'm going to be making something, and I literally never use unsalted butter, and there's a few reasons for that. Now, as with all of these things on this list, a ton of bakers and professional pastry chefs will tell you that all the things that I just told you are absolutely incorrect. So I'm just looking at it from a standpoint of what works for me, what I like to taste, and what my customers have liked to taste as well. I am all about saving time. So if I can skip these little steps that do take up time or that take up more dishes, you guys know how much I hate using multiple dishes, then I'm gonna do them. Anyway, so the thing with unsalted butter is, I don't know if it's just where I live or if this is a universal butter thing, but unsalted butter is more expensive than salted butter. I'm not really sure why. I'm guessing it's because they have a different way of processing it, so that's why it costs more. So that's probably the #1 driving factor as to why I don't use unsalted butter. Also, in my everyday cooking, I like to use salted butter. I don't usually keep unsalted butter and salted butter on hand. I usually just buy the butter in bulk and it's all salted. My other thinking for this is that I like a good amount of salt in my baking. Now, here is where some people differ. So I'm really just saying what I do. But some people like to control the level of salt that goes in. This is why a lot of pastry chefs, a lot of bakers will opt for the unsalted butter. I say, I want to save my salt. I want things just done for me in one go. I always add even just a little bit more salt to my recipe, even after I've used unsalted butter. But sometimes I will be like, you know what, this particular recipe, it doesn't do well with a whole lot of salt, so I'm just gonna use salted butter and then I'm just gonna leave it. Literally, I have never ever had a problem. So the next thing that I do is I always make my cake recipes in one bowl. Now, you might have seen some of my earlier videos where I have it all separated out and it looks all nice, and I tell you to put some of the wet ingredients in and some of the dry ingredients in. And yes, that is the right way to do things. So that's why I wanted to show you the way that the recipe that I learned from taught me how to do it. But realistically, I often will just dump everything into that bowl. Like I said earlier, I do not like cleaning extra dishes. I'm sure there are so many of you that would agree with me that that is one of the worst things about baking. What I always do is I put everything in at once, but there is a little bit of a process to doing that. So the first thing is that you want to make sure that you do whip up the wet ingredients first. So if it is something that requires you to make those eggs nice and fluffy, if there's butter in the recipe, you really want to cream those butters and sugars together. And that is just a no-brainer. Of course you're going to do that to make that cake light and fluffy. Then you're going to add in your dry ingredients. Now here is where I usually differ from recipes. Most recipes will say, now combine all your dry ingredients into one bowl and then slowly add it in and then add in a little bit more of the wet. And yes, I feel like if you want to be a baker that's doing things to a T, you can go ahead and do that. There's no harm in following those directions. But when you're making cakes at the rate that I am, you want to go fast. So I tend to just throw everything in. And I don't really mix in the dry ingredients together. For example, if it's flour and baking soda, then I don't mix the flour in with the baking soda. I just put that flour in and the baking soda right in, and then I combine them all together. And for me, it works out just fine. I haven't noticed a huge difference. And the final thing on my list, which I know is usually a huge no-no, is subbing regular flour for cake flour. And I know that a lot of us probably don't have cake flour on hand. I only have one recipe that actually calls for cake flour, but I honestly haven't used cake flour in it for about a year and a half. And I asked people in my life that have tasted my cakes over and over and over, and I've said, can you taste the difference? I put them side by side, and they can't. So my thought process is, why bother going through the trouble of purchasing something completely different that I only use for this one recipe? It does alter the crumb very, very slightly, but obviously not that much to the point where even a frequent client or customer or just your family members would be able to notice the change. I will say that it took several years to decide what things I could cut out of a recipe and what steps I didn't really need to take in order to execute something properly. So don't just go ignoring all of these steps every single time, but I'm telling you that these are the things that work with my tried and true recipes. And when I approach a new recipe, I will often look at the whole kind of instruction list, and if it seems similar to the way my instruction list of my recipes are, then I know that I can use the same techniques. And I really haven't had many fails with it. So I hope you can cut corners somewhere with your Christmas baking. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you can be part of the Sweetie fam. Right now, I'm uploading daily, so make sure you hit that notification bell so you know when I upload. Also, be sure to comment, request, or ask a question. I love hearing from you guys. Bye!